Welcome back to our Adventure Box podcast. This is Zach Edwards with another episode of our Adventure Box curriculum that's found in a monthly box we call the Adventure Box, and we send it to everyone who orders it. Okay, so Historical Conquest is the one that promotes this curriculum, and basically inside the box is another pack of their cards. So if you want to be able to see that set of cards, you need to buy the buy the package. For this one, though, we actually have it right here. This is the Ancient American expansion pack. I wanted to go over this a little bit with you. Inside, you're going to find the Bering Land Bridge. Okay, so you've got a migration over the Bering Land Bridge. You have Tapiltz Quetzalcoatl. And he was a Tolmec ruler near where the Aztecs were. Okay, so you've got that. You have the invention of concrete. Now, that's a great one. Ocean-going canoes. You have a lot of other technology. You have a spiritual leader, female spiritual leader, Lady Xoc. That's X-O-C. You have the Mesoamerican Codex. You have the trade networks of the Hopewell Indians. That's also really cool. Nezahualcoyotl. Okay, let's see. It says Nezahualcoyotl, born in 1402 and ruled from 1431 to 1472, was the philosopher king of Texcoco, which is the island that the Aztecs migrated to. We talked about that. An influential city-state in the Aztec Triple Alliance. Renowned for his wisdom and leadership, he transformed Texcoco into a center of culture, learning, and a center of culture, learning, and political power. Nezahualcoyotl was a brilliant engineer and architect, overseeing the construction of the imperial Texcoco aqueducts and gardens. That's pretty cool. You have Tlachtihol-Tepetl. It's the largest pyramid in South America, Central America. We talked about him. Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui. So he was an Inca around 1438 to 1471. Much like the same time that we just read his bio. Nope, not Texcoatl. It was, who was it before? You guys remember? Nezahualcoyotl, who ruled 1431 to 1472. So it's about the same time, but these were Lake Texcoco, with the Aztecs. You have Pakal the Great. Ooh, that's a card that you want to keep. Very strong, and you'll have to see what he does. I'm not going to tell you the abilities. Different earthwork mounds from North America. Ooh, Machu Picchu, where I'm going. Can't wait. The Mesa Verde, which is the Cliff Dwellers. Hiawatha. He's a Native American leader of the Iroquois Confederacy. You have the Acompechtoli. Look these up. Look up how to pronounce the names. You want to know how to pronounce names because these are amazing leaders you need to know. Amazing and sometimes not so amazing, depending on what they did. You have the construction of the Great Wall of Peru. Who knew about that one? I didn't actually. So that was great to know about. And the settlement of Tenochtitlan. Now, there is actually a Tenochtitlan, the city, but this is the event, the settlement of the Tenochtitlan. And the reason why that's so important is because that was in Lake Texcoco for the Aztecs when they first made land and basically set up their civilization. So I just wanted to go over a little bit of what was in the box when you open up your monthly adventure box. Oops, there you go. Monthly adventure box. And this is really, really nice box. It's great. Oh, and you're going to love it. For the Age of Exploration, we have totally different crafts that you're going to love to see. And also, we're going to have the ancient Africa civilizations and cultures, which that one has some other things that we're really excited about. So we're making 2 sets of crafts for 2 different boxes coming up. So if you've got those, they'll be in the mail fairly soon, and you're going to get all those things. The crafts that we had in there, the corn and the clay, nothing compared to what we have in this next one. If it arrives. I have to stipulate that. If it arrives. We have it on the way. It's supposed to be here in 15 days. That'll bring it around September 15th, and then we'll be able to send it all out after that point. So look forward to all that. Now, back to what the show is actually about. Today, we're going to be talking about the pre-Columbian Caribbean. So this is pre-Columbus arriving. Now, they say that it started back in 5000 BC. So 5000 BC, you have all the inhabitants of the Caribbean coming into that area. Now, they actually say that most of the time, and I'm going to show you this a little bit better in a few minutes, but let's bring up the map. Oh, that's right, I don't have that mouse. Let's bring up the map. So the map, so there's the United States. That's where I am right now. Here's where you are, somewhere in this area, maybe over in California, I don't know. Maybe in Wales or Australia. There's people there as well that are watching this. So you have Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, the lower antiquities, which are these islands up here, and the greater antiquities, which are these larger islands right here. Now, there are islands such as Cuba, which is the largest island in the area, and you have a tiny little island over here that if you rode your bike, this is for all you youth, if you ride your bike around the island, it would take you 1 hour to get around the whole island. That's a really small island, but inhabited. Okay, so in here, how did this become inhabited? So they think, because of some of the archaeological finds, that people came from here over and then traveled down the islands. And later on, around 500 BC, they traveled up the islands and came into this area and then collided with each other. So I want to show you a little video on this so you can get a little bit more information. These are from known experts, one from the U.S. Naval Academy. So let's listen to what they have to say. Actually, I forgot to rewind it. So let me go back here. I know exactly where it's at. There we go. Let's start it.
First, we should define what we mean by the pre-colonial Caribbean. We'll start with the geographical scale of the Caribbean. This includes more than 7,000 islands in the Caribbean Sea, as well as the other landforms that touch this body of water. The larger islands in the Caribbean are grouped together as the Greater Antilles. The group of smaller islands to the south of these are the Lesser Antilles. In terms of time, pre-colonial refers to the history of the region from the earliest migrations starting about 15,000 years ago and up to the late 15th century. Caribbean history spans thousands of years and a large geographical area with a lot of diversity. For example, the size of the islands ranges from Cuba, which is as large as the state of Tennessee, to Islas Mujeres, which if you rode your bike around the whole thing would take less than an hour. Some islands have dry, desert-like environments, while others have rainforest. Some have high mountain ranges, while others are at or below sea level. Then there's the wide variety of plant and animal species. But the region and its people also share a lot of characteristics. Why? Well, partly this is because the region was connected through a series of overlapping networks. much like Afro-Eurasia's interconnected networks of the 13th and 14th centuries. So what do we know about the people and the societies that lived in this region for thousands of years? And how did they build networks of exchange across the aquatic highway of the Caribbean Sea and wider Atlantic Ocean? Hi, I'm Sharika Crawford, a professor of Latin American history at the U.S. Naval Academy. And in order to answer these questions, I turn to two experts, Dr. Corinne Hoffman and Dr. Jorge Ulloa Hung, who will help us answer these questions. I'll start with the basics. When were the Caribbean islands settled, and where did these early communities migrate from?
It is important to understand the possible connection of two different moments of the migrations to the Caribbean island. For example, in the early moments, in the 5000 BC, you have really an important connection, not only with South America, you have an important connection now with Yucatan or Central America. And for example, the early communities enters for two ways of migration: to Central America, to the Greek Antilles, especially to Cuba, Puerto Rico, and other big islands. And you have another corridor of migration from South America for this first moment of migration.
And then a second one, which is to be dated more like 2,500 years ago. And until now, we see, in fact, the major movement coming from South America and probably Eastern South America. So one have to think about, indeed, Venezuela or the Guyanas, maybe.
So we know that there were at least two major migrations from the mainland of Central and South America. And we also have evidence of these migrations from the archaeological record, such as the similarities of tools used by people living on different islands. What else can the archaeological record tell us about how these pre-colonial societies lived?
Well, as an archaeologist, we are learning more and more on how the indigenous people lived in the islands. And also with the advancement of techniques, of course, we can get insight into their foodways, into their diet, into how they interacted with their environment, how they were fishing, how they were trading, how they were transporting materials. And that is the wonderful thing about archaeology.
This is why I wanted to get into archaeology.
It is not a written history, but it is a history which is in the soil, and the soil has to be opened like a book. And that is how we discovered that people were building, for example, how they were building their houses with wooden posts. Sometimes they were round, sometimes they were oval, sometimes they were 5 to 8 meters in diameter, but we also found much larger houses up to 19 meters in diameter. People were burying their deceased kins or family members in the houses, sometimes outside the houses.
Could you imagine digging a hole and putting your buried mom, brother, any one of your family members in the house where you lived? Maybe we've been watching too many scary stories, but that just doesn't sound right to me. I would rather have them away from the house or such. Plus, how deep would you have to dig that hole? I would dig it pretty deep. So, interesting that they would actually bury the bodies inside the home. But then you think about it, remember the earth workers up in the Hopewell, the Adena, those people would actually do the same thing and would actually have mounds that they lived near that were just full of bodies, and they'd add a little bit more dirt around the mound after they'd buried someone in there. Then they dig a hole in that mound and put another person, and they make it a little bit bigger, and more soil would make these large mounds, and these were the burial plots. So it's different ways of using to prepare your family members for the afterlife. So, sorry, let's continue.
These burial practices you describe make me curious about belief systems in the Caribbean. Jorge, can you tell us more about how these beliefs changed from the early migrations to the later ones?
It's not homogeneous. For example, belief system at the beginning of this community entered in the Caribbean island. Its belief system is more related with the mainland society, with this more egalitarian society. They believe more in ancestors, and they offers many offerings to their ancestor in the burials. You have a special space to bury his ancestor in the middle of the community, especially in the early moment of this society. And in the late moments, you have more conceptualized and more symbolized of this belief system. You have a kind of mythology. You have a belief in icons or beings. This kind of being is like a god. And this god have a different powers. And this power is related with the owner of the icons. This is a reason if you have a powerful god, a powerful icon, you have at the same time a power. You have at the same time social power. You have at the same time social influence over your community.
So the archaeological record can help us understand how these communities shared.
I want to hit a point there. So what's really interesting about archaeology, and as I keep telling you, there's fact and there's theory. Now, everything that he said about gods and such like that is a theory, because there's no way of telling. I was once given this assignment to say, okay, what would happen if let's just say a volcano exploded and we were all caught in complete animation, just like completely still. So say back in the time of Mount Vesuvius erupting, the eruption happened so fast that people were still in bed. Some people were still walking, and they basically crystallized at that point. They either were eradicated by lava or hot ash, or the dust basically encased their bodies and they were preserved. What would your house tell an archaeologist about you if they came in about a few hundred years later or a few thousand years later? They come into your house, what would they see? Okay, so think of it this way. One of the first things that they would see, and you think the stereotypical American house, they would walk in, they might go past the stairs, depending on how your house is situated. They go into your living room. Now, they find all of these seating arrangements set up around one thing. What's that one thing that all of the seating arrangements are set around? They're all basically in some way pointed towards this one object that almost every house has, especially right now. What is that object? It's the television. So some people, in 1,000 years from now, 2,000 years from now, come into your house, see the way that your house is situated, maybe find your body sitting there, encased in stone or whatever. And what would they think? Oh, that must be a thing of worship. That is the thing that's center to their house. Their chairs are all encircling that. Huh. Interesting. What other things would they think about? Think about it. What other things would you think about if you came into your home? Again, it'd be in like ash or covered in now petrified in a stone-like feature, or maybe it's completely preserved. Don't know. What would you think that person, you, would be doing with their life if they saw your house and how it was situated? Walk through your house. As an extra assignment after this podcast, walk around your house and think, what would my ancestors, what would people coming from another planet or whoever came to visit this one location, what would they think about me in my household? Okay, now think of it as an archaeologist. An archaeologist comes to a site 1,000 years later and uncovers all this pottery. It's very similar to each other. Well, like he said, there's a lot of iconography, icons that are very similar. These must be their gods with little differences, different powers. Is it actually what that it meant? Here's one thing to know about the Taino. Now, the Taino are the ones that Columbus came in and visited with him, and then in the end served the Spanish under their rule. Now, what documentation do you have of the Tainos? Well, just so you know, every pure blood Taino, as far as I know, I gotta double check this, but I am nearly 100% sure, are completely gone. the Taino people do not fully exist anymore. Not as a entire non-mixed race group. And that's really sad. They didn't have the writings. They do have what missionaries were able to gather by collecting their history from word of mouth. But that's it. So a lot of the things that we think about the Taino or the Carib or most of these other indigenous people out in the Caribbean could be false. It really could. But it could be true too. That's why it's not a fact, it's a theory. So I just wanted to give that in because that was really important to be able to understand. It's the difference between the fact and the theory. In these ancient times, you can't be 100% sure. But this is the best that the archaeologists can do, mixed with culture and word of mouth, because again, their records were kept by word of mouth, and trying to piece together their history. It's very hard. And the archaeologists do the best they can. Okay, continue in this video. Oops, again, I don't have that mouse.
Beliefs, how they acquired food, and how they built their homes. Another thing that archaeology can tell us is how indigenous Caribbean peoples got the other things they needed. Trade goods such as jade and ceramics were transported from island to island on dugout canoes, and these items crisscrossed the Caribbean Sea.
That
Can you tell us what other items were traded between the islands and also between the mainland and the islands?
So yeah, and then there's also, for example, another trade item which we have been finding is, for example, teeth from dogs that were made into pendants and that were traded across the islands. We have also found teeth coming from mammals like jaguars or tapirs, for example, and we've seen that they were coming from the South American mainland. So all in all, there has been an enormous trade and exchange going on between the islands, between the Greater Antilles and the Lesser Antilles, but also between the islands and the mainland of South America. So there was a continuous flow of mobility and exchange between these islands going on from the first colonizations till really 1492.
Okay, I'm going to end it there. So this is the point. Look at all these different trade routes that could have been based on the archaeological things that they have found. So if someone from the Cuban area travels down here to grab some sort of material, or maybe that material made it up here and then it came over, which makes more sense because let's bring it back to the map. As you can see, the end of the peninsula is actually closest to Cuba. So you could actually travel that far. Now you can't see Cuba from Florida, but what you can see, I was out here. This is where I came out for my, right here. Yeah, U.S. Virgin Islands. This is where I came. Actually, I came out to St. John. No, not that St. John. There's multiple St. Johns. I came out to the Virgin Islands, and I could actually see Puerto Rico from there. So that amount of distance you can actually see. But that amount of distance, maybe not. Maybe so. Maybe on a really good day. But you have to think, as the Earth curves, anything that you could see 100 miles off might actually be behind the horizon. Okay, little tangent there. So let's go into this book. So you have the pre-Columbian Caribbean, which you can actually see a lot of the different artifacts that go all the way back to about 5000 BC. Now in here, let's also check this out. So from what they were saying, there was a migration from the Yucatan Peninsula over into Cuba, down Cuba, and filling in all these islands around it as you come over to Puerto Rico. Sorry, Dominican Republic, and then Puerto Rico right here. So as you're going, you have people that came through here, and these were the ancestors of who? The Taino. So these were both the Celadioid culture, which then became and also the Archaic Age with the early inhabitants. Let's see. Yeah. So you have all these people coming down here, the Taino coming down here. But what was coming the other direction? Around 500 BC, like they were talking about, came from down here in South America and started climbing up these different islands. So instead of jumping to a large island from the Yucatan Peninsula, you had people traveling up these islands as they worked their way towards Puerto Rico. These were the ancestors, the pre-Carib people. Now, they talked about how a lot of their cultures were mixed. There's a reasoning for that. So, just as one example, and we'll talk more about Columbus later on, but this is very interesting about this area. You have the Taino people. Actually, let me bring up, I've got another image for you. Let me bring this image up. Not that image. Okay. You have this image. Let's zoom in. Okay. So these are the different tribes that were in this area. You have the Taino. So traveling up here, you come down. These are the Taino people that are in this area. This is the Ciboney Taino. Here's the classic Taino. These are the people that Columbus met, were the more classic Taino. You have all of these other ones, which it's funny, the Caribs are not part of this. Well, the Caribs were actually a big part of this because they actually started traveling up these islands and came to mix with the Taino. Now, how did they mix? There's a lot of question behind this. It's not 100% sure. But most likely what happened, according to records that were set by a doctor that was sent with Columbus during, I think, his second voyage, this doctor documented exactly what happened. When Columbus came back from Spain, he found that the Taino people were attacked before he got there by the Carib people. The Caribs actually took a lot of their people, killed off a lot, but took a lot of people, including women and children, mostly women and children, brought them back to their own islands. And what did they do there? Without getting into all the detail, because it is somewhat graphic in his record, and actually you can read some of that record in the next weeks. I try to be as careful as possible. But you have the Carib people who enslaved them, abused them in many ways, and also potentially, according to these records, even ate the Taino people that they had captured. So, because of this, a lot of the women would become their wives. Because the women knew the Taino language and not the Carib language, the Caribs ended up learning the Taino language and some of the cultures. And so they mixed. And so they were able to share their cultures. The culture was taken somewhat by the Carib people. Now, interesting enough, this is a diagram that I wanted you to see because this is very interesting about this area. If you look, here it says no indigenous, no data. If you look, the Taino are wiped out. They're gone. So no indigenous is right here, is right where Columbus came. Because the Spanish, when they came through, they did two things. One, they founded the land, or found the land as they claim it. But then, not Columbus, for those that say it was Columbus, have their facts somewhat wrong as per theory. Okay, so I'll go more into what happened to Columbus later on. But there's a lot more to the story than Columbus being an evil dictator that tried to hurt the people. You'll get to read some of his journal entries and such. So you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. But the Spanish very much abused and enslaved the people of the Tainos until the point either killing them, killing off by smallpox, or basically they're merging cultures. The Taino disappeared, and there's no actual like full-blooded Taino as well as I know. So as you can see, these islands over here, They do. They have either less than 2% or about 2 to 5% of the indigenous population still there. Now, what happened over here? Well, the Spanish took over, and instead of using the indigenous anymore, they brought over slaves from Africa to man the plantations over here. Again, we're going to go over that later on. But look at this. You can see very little amounts of indigenous still here. They mixed, and even with mixed, they were still considered part of the indigenous population. So you don't have to be 100% pureblood in order to be in these statistics. But even Brazil, it's a less than 2%, but they have a large population. They have a lot of people coming from Puerto Rico, and a lot of people from all over the world came to that area. But if you look, black, over 50%. Bolivia, over 50%. El Salvador, over 50%. Peru and Ecuador, fairly close. 36 to 50%, or even 21 to 35. Not exactly sure which one those two are. But it lets you see what happened to them. The Taino were gone. Wiped out. That is the struggle with exploration. That is the evil that comes with power, that even an indigenous people would be wiped out. There's no excuse for it. Now, here's an interesting thing. A lot of people like to say, oh, there was bowing, there's all these different things. No, the Taino were they were a peaceful people, but they were very polite, not to the point of bowing. So this is actually a rendition. This was not painted at Columbus's adventure, or his arrival. I think, yeah. This is definitely not, because this type of artwork wasn't done until way later. So just so you know, this is not the artwork of colonial America when Columbus first arrived. So these are all renditions, which are all false. And for the truth of it, we don't know. We weren't there. So were the indigenous there when Columbus arrived? If you want a fairly good, accurate rendition of what happened, as far as we can tell, the best book to read is actually 1492. 1492 allows you to basically live through Columbus's journals, live through Columbus's adventures, and also live through the negative effects of Columbus coming to the Americas. Some don't have the best light on him, but some things show that it wasn't as black and white as it shows. So it's a very interesting rendition to go through. So read up if you're that age. Read 1492 if you really want to know what happened when Columbus came. But look at some of the artwork that they created. This is the Taino people. The Taino people were very good at art. So I'd actually like to see what those are, if they're actual teeth or if they're shells. I'm curious, very curious. What else do I have? Here, whoops. Oh, that's all I have right here. Okay. I had a few more images, but so this is another point that comes to learning about this era of civilizations. If you're going on into African civilization, you're going to find that there are some interesting things theories that we might have as the archaeologists, as people that live there. There's a lot of different things, and some things that are not true, some things that are false completely, and some things that are actually true. And it's like, wow, really? So again, this is why I stress at the very beginning, fact and theory. What we want to do is get as close as possible. And as archaeologists, that's what they do. They try to get as close as possible. The Taino people, again, as I said, were a very peaceful people to some extent. They still had weapons. They still protected their island. But they weren't, from the documentation that we have, again, we don't have it all, they were more peaceful people. People like the Caribs were possibly cannibals, though it's not 100% sure, because we have documentation from what the doctor that went with Columbus, which we'll go over his name later on, what he experienced. Can we say that's false? No, we can't say that's false. Could we say that he might have misunderstood? Maybe. But again, we go by eyewitnesses, and he's one of the only eyewitnesses that we have of that time. Now, one other thing to know about Columbus, and we'll go over this afterwards, it's actually part of your next curriculum, is what happened, and this is if you're doing American history, what happened to Columbus's journals? Well, they're no longer. They're lost. The rendition that we have was actually rewritten by one of his critics. So it's a very interesting way of seeing history based off of what archaeology tells us, based off of what the journals tell us, and based off what other people's journals tell us. According to this doctor, Columbus actually did care about the people. According to Casas, who you'll find out, he's a friar, not so nice to the indigenous, but not as bad as those that came after him. So we will talk about that next month's Adventure Box in the Age of Exploration. Stay tuned for that. Tomorrow we're going to go over more of the South American. The reason why I did this and talked about the Caribbean before going down into the South American is because the people there are not as well known. The people in the Caribbean are very well known because that's where Columbus arrived. The people of the Incas were the most empowered. So they had the largest span, and they lasted until Francisco Pizarro came in. All things to know. But now that we've got Inca taken care of and the Caribbean taken care of, let's talk about some of the lesser known in South America. And that comes tomorrow. So thanks so much for joining us on this Adventure Box podcast, and we will catch you next time. Take care and have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.